Hey there, survivors, how's it going? I'm your host Douglas here at Drownblade Productions, bringing you a very special Friday the 13th video. You already know what this video is about due to the title and thumbnail, so I'll waste no time building up to it. I do just want to say first though, as a lifelong fan of Friday the 13th, this has to be one of the absolute coolest things to ever enter my collection, and I'm super excited to share this with you all. As I said, we'll waste no time, so I'll go ahead and get these pieces on display so you all can be enjoying it, and then I'll tell you a bit more about each of them. Here we have an incredible bust of Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, Part 7, A New Blood. Now, we're not only going to be taking a look at this bust, but I also acquired this hockey mask blank at the very same time. Both of these pieces were recently posted up for sale alongside some other screen used mold Jason pieces and pieces from Halloween, as well as just some really nice replicas. And whenever I saw this, I really didn't want to pass up on it, so this ended up costing me a Gen 1 Fantastic Faces. I essentially just traded that mask to get these, and it is absolutely worth it, in my opinion. A million times over it was worth it. I love Gen 1s, they're beautiful, but guys, I mean, come on, look at this. While neither of these pieces are screen used or production used pieces, these still have some incredible Friday the 13th history attached to them. This is a casting made off of the original screen used Hero Part 7 hockey mask. This was done by Mario Kerner. He molded his original screen used mask some years ago and ended up producing a run of black 7 hockey masks and red 7 hockey masks. These were made out of a resin fiberglass, as you can see on the inside there. You can see the fibers. At the time, Mario offered a very limited run of the red 7 and black 7 hockey masks, and once those were done, that was pretty much it. However, like most things that make it out in the prop world, if anybody does replicas that are screen used mold or recast or whatever, typically there's going to be other artists that end up recasting those. And this mask, not this specific copy, but those that were released, were definitely heavily recasted, and many of the Part 7 masks that have made it out to different artists that claim to be from the screen used molds were actually recasts directly off of these. And when Mario was getting ready to do those runs, he had to do a couple of prototype casts, determining different thicknesses, materials, stuff like that, and this happens to be one of the prototype hockey masks that was pulled. There actually is a photo on the COA that shows this particular mask right above the actual screen used Part 7 mask. So not only was it in very close proximity from it, but it was also pulled directly off of it. There are several details that you're going to find on this particular mask that you're not going to find on all these other various recasts. Typically, a lot of the fine details are gone. A lot of them that are made are vacuum formed, like all the scratches on the side here, the pitting on the mask over here, and all of these are very crisp details. You can see it on both sides, and of course, this is an uncut blank, and I will be leaving it as such. I will not be altering this piece because personally, I think it holds a bit more of like historical value, not monetary value, in the state that it's in. So I will be displaying this next to this as is. So this is an incredible piece of Friday the 13th replica history, and I believe these were the very first screen-used mold hockey masks that actually were offered to the public. And we're going to talk about that term a little bit towards the end of this video, screen-used mold, because that gets thrown around a lot, and I want to just try and define that a bit more for people, because, again, this technically didn't come out of the screen-used molds, but it was made off of original applications and off of one of Kane's life casts. This didn't come out of the screen-used mold, but it was recasted directly off of the actual screen-used Hero prop. Now, as I mentioned, many people have recasted these hockey masks as they made it out, and after a few years, Mario ended up selling the actual silicone mold that he made directly off of his screen used. So some were produced from that mold as well, secondhand, but they weren't part of the official original black or red 7 runs. Here we have a plastic vacuum form version of the Part 7 Hero mask that was gifted to me. This has a few defects on it, and it was actually broken on this side, and I went ahead and just repainted it, kind of touched it up, make it look a little bit closer to the screen used mask. This was before we had the very nice high quality pictures that Prop Store released. And if you look at the pitting, you can tell these were all manually added because those details no longer existed on the casting. Same with the scratches on this side, so they're not going to match up and be 100% screen accurate. But more or less, it is pretty much the same exact sculpture, and many people were selling this as a screen-used mold hockey mask. I actually don't know the artist that produced this particular blank or who it came from, but still, nonetheless, it's pretty close. I mean, it's essentially the same thing, but this is much, much nicer, crisper, and has all the actual details that the true screen-used mask does have. So this is the mask I will be displaying next to this piece since it was gifted to me. It's already painted up, and I think having all three of these together on display will make for a pretty cool display with some pretty interesting history. Now, as for the bust here, the clothes, of course, are replica. The chain here is just a very, very cheap Halloween store chain. I'm sure many of you who have seen these, you recognize that immediately. And then we have a 3D printed logo for Friday Part 7, which is pretty cool. But we're here to talk about the head itself. This piece, I do believe, from the information I was given and from what research I've been able to do online, was one of the SSN, which is Silver Champagne Novelties, pre-enlargement molds of the Part 7. So this was the precursor to the full museum bust that they released. The museum bust, of course, did have the shoulders, the chest, the spine. It's a very, very well made, very cool piece. But this is a little bit smaller than that, and this is actually a little bit truer to the original screen-used appliances. For those of you who don't know what SSN is, that is Sean Clark's company, Silver Champagne Novelties. He worked together with Brad Harden and John Carl Buechler to produce this piece, and I do believe they used some actual appliances out of Buechler's molds on top of Kane's life cast to get this effect. However, the back of the head essentially was resculpted. In fact, I think if you look, you can kind of see the faint line running right around here. And I'm pretty sure that's where the face application ends, and the back of the head was just completely replicated to try and be as close as possible to the original screen used. So while it's not 100% screen used mold, 100% accurate, it's still as close as you're ever going to get to having a screen accurate or screen used Part 7 Jason. Unless, of course, you've got the big bucks to drop on a prop store auction, in which case you could take an actual screen used or production piece home with you. And in fact, recently, Mario Kerner has been selling off his entire collection, and many of those pieces have already went under the hammer, including the original screen-used hero mask that this was pulled off of. But nonetheless, many other pieces went up for sale other than just the mask. They actually did have the full, tattered costume. I do believe the Burn undersuit, the one that Kane wore during that very, very famous Burn scene, that went up for sale. The teeth that he wore with the mask went up for sale. And I believe Jason's right hand as well. Maybe there's some other stuff too, but at least those pieces just from Part 7 sold recently. Before we move on, it is worth mentioning that this is not the initial stock paint job and eye. The eye is by Josh Ludeman, and the paint job was by Hugo Melkor, I do believe. And I gotta say, the paint job is absolutely spectacular. The low lighting that it's currently in is not going to capture those effects well enough. And the eye also is very, very well done. All right, now let's talk about the screen used mold term. It's something that gets thrown around an awful lot. And honestly, most of the time, it's an inaccurate description of what the piece truly is. However, it's the easiest way to describe what it is. And I'll go ahead and define that a bit further. So for something to be screen-used mold, it would have to actually be derived from the 100% true molds that were used to create the prop or whatever piece it may be that was used in the production of the film, TV show, whatever it may be. Then we have the first generation recasts, which would be something like this, which comes directly off of the screen-used prop. So it would be a replica of a screen-used piece that has lineage to the original piece, but it's not truly out of the screen-used mold. With fiberglass and resin, typically they're going to be pretty darn close to the originals. However, with latex pieces, they're going to be smaller typically. Some of you may have watched my video recently where I showed the Jason Goes to Hell hood that was made by HSS, Sam McCain. It's very, very small. That's because he molded that original screen-used piece, then made a master based off of that, so it would be a foam-filled copy of that, and then he made a mold off of that. So it lost size every time they had to make a mold. When you're making props, masks, makeup appliances, or whatever out of latex, it's going to shrink. So it's going to be smaller than the original sculpture. And when you recast it, it's going to shrink even more. So for instance, with a piece like this, they made a cast off of original appliances, which would then shrink. so it's a bit smaller than the actual screen-used piece. But this thing is nowhere near as small as the Jason Goes to Hell hood. Like I said, I don't really 100% know the production of that piece, but judging by how much size it lost, I'm pretty certain that Sam would have made a master, which would be a little bit smaller than the screen used, and then the castings made off of that mold would be, yet again, another size smaller. Whereas this would only be one size smaller. So it's slightly smaller than the screen used applications, but still, like I said, literally as close as you're ever going to get. This piece also has absolutely incredible details. All the fine little details in the sculpture are nice, crisp, and clean. So it really is pretty much the best representation of that you're going to get. And as I mentioned recently, the teeth were sold in this recent auction. Those teeth actually used to be owned by Justin Mabry, and I do believe that they used those very teeth to make a cast and add them to these busts. However, after comparing this bust to the full museum bust, which is an enlarged version of this sculpture, I did notice a few subtle differences. Mainly around the mouth area. The lips are a bit different and the teeth are also different. So I don't know if Silver Champagne Novelties deliberately resculpted some areas in case someone were to recast their work, they would be able to notice it immediately, or what exactly the idea was, but I've looked online, I found some other examples of the pre-enlargement busts, which would be like this, and those details do seem to match with this, versus the museum bust, the mouth and the teeth look a little bit different. I'll try and include some photos to give you guys some representation of what I'm talking about, and to be honest, I'm kind of splitting hairs here. It's nothing too major, there's very minor differences, but I do believe that the lips and the teeth placement on this is a little bit closer to the true original screen-used appliances. So with these being so few of them made, from what I know, I think 4 of them exist. Like I said, I think there's a possibility that they could have made those differences on the museum bust purposefully, because as I also mentioned in this video, once people started getting casts of these fully finished copies, people started recasting them almost immediately. So it's one of those things like, when something this special gets out, and especially back then, it was almost guaranteed that someone was going to recast your work. It was just gonna happen. Regardless, a majority of the sculpture is still screen-used mold, and like I said, literally as close as you're ever going to get. The camera overheated, but after a short break, we are back. As I was saying, SSN did come out with their own movie mold Part 7 hockey mask around the same time, but as many fans have noticed over the years, there's been plenty of comparison photos and stuff like that. Some people even were lucky enough to have both a Red 7, Black 7, as well as the SSN version. They've noticed some differences. For one, this was casted directly off of one of these screen-used hero masks. So all these details, the shape of it, everything would match 100% what is seen on screen. However, the SSN masks have a little bit more of a curve to them. It's a little bit closer to the classic hockey mask shape. And I'm guessing that this was pulled directly from one of Beekler's molds and then modified to be like the Part 7. Those are still great masks regardless, don't get me wrong, but as far as screen accuracy, I do believe that would make these a little bit closer. But yeah, I mean, all around, these are really, really great props, and the fact that SSN, Sean Clark, Brad Harden, John Carl Beekler all worked together to make this something for the community is really, really special. If you're watching this video and you have not seen it, Sean Clark does have a video on the SSN Museum busts himself over on his channel. I think it's only like a 4-minute long video or so. It doesn't go extensively into the history of the whole process of them making it, but there's still some really cool photos there. He gives all the information there on how they brought that to life. And I think he also said that initially they were going to do 30 of the full Head and Shoulders museum busts, but they only made 15 of them. And I believe, yet again, the number on this is 3 or 4 copies, I believe 4. So this is incredibly rare. This being a prototype also makes it super, super rare. And I'm just incredibly happy to own these. I do believe that SSN did also do a movie mask version, so it was actually a wearable mask of the Part 7, but I think those were enlarged versions so that more people could wear them. There's not a whole lot left to say about these, regardless of the differences in this and the museum bust. They're both really incredible pieces that are absolutely the closest thing you'll ever get to having the screen-used original Part 7 makeup appliances. And I really appreciate all the work that everyone put into this. John Carl Beekler for his assistance, Sean Clark and Brad Harden for the work they did, and specifically Hugo Melchior and Josh Ludeman for doing the amazing work on this piece in particular. I love the paint up on this copy, and owning these pieces is an absolute dream come true to me, because out of all the different looks for Jason in the films, personally, Part 7 has to be the most badass. I know a lot of people don't like that look, oddly enough, but it's certainly one of my favorites, and this is an absolute dream come true. It's one of my favorite pieces in the collection. I cannot wait to put this on display where all of you, if you come to the museum, will be able to enjoy this as well. Once I can get the full display put together, replace that chain and stuff, I'll probably do another short video just showing you guys an updated look at it. And yet again, if anybody has any information on some of the stuff that I mentioned in today's video, feel free to comment down below and let me know. I wasn't active in the forums or a part of the online mass community at all when these were initially produced, so I'm sure there's some people that were around back then that might have a bit more information on these, but from everything I could find online, reaching out to some people who definitely know what they're talking about whenever it comes to this stuff, this is pretty much all the information I have on this, and I gotta say, yet again, it's just a dream come true. I could not be happier with this piece. It is so damn awesome. Love you all, thank you for watching, and see you next time.